Hi everyone, my name is Greg Richardson and I am here in Block 1, which is our crop ground just by the main driveway heading into the property. And Sally mentioned to you all that there's sort of this revolution that's been occurring in terms of our understanding of how the soil works, recognizing that it is really a living system, and that really changes our relationship to how we manage it. And it brings up this sort of increasingly popularized pursuit of increasing soil health in our crop ground. And so what that means is different in practice in a lot of different places depending on what your context is. But there are 5 key principles that are pretty universal that I'm going to share with you, and which we follow to the best of our ability. The first is keeping the soil covered, so protecting it from wind, from rain, from anything that would disturb it, that would cause it to cap. This is good for regulating the temperature and the moisture of the soil. The second thing is keeping living plants growing for as much of the year as possible, due to the relationship that exists between the soil microorganisms and the plants, and the capacity of those plants to pull CO2 from the atmosphere and down into the ground, pushing them out as sugars. If you don't have living plants doing that, then essentially all of the sucking down of CO2 stops, yet any organisms that are still alive on the soil are still respiring and kicking CO2 out into the atmosphere. And so you start to create an imbalance in that fashion. The third thing is having diversity. Having a diversity of different kinds of plants with different types of root structures that can access nutrients and moisture in different ways. We're learning a lot about the different capacities of legumes, as an example, that fix nitrogen to share that with neighboring plants. And there's certainly capacity for more of that kind of exchange to happen that we're learning more about with over time. The fourth thing is to reduce disturbance. So tillage is an example of something that really breaks up the soil, turns it over. The less you disturb the soil, the more you preserve the integrity of its structure. Root channels, earthworm channels, mycorrhizal fungi networks are all able to be preserved in a way that improve the integrity of the soil and the health of it, its ability to exchange air and water, have it move through the soil, as well as create habitat for those organisms that are providing these services for the plants. And the fifth thing is the integration of animals. And that is something that there's a little bit more pushback around in terms of why is that beneficial. And one of the things that does is it helps to cycle nutrients. It helps to sort of break down any residues that are on that field. It also introduces a whole new suite of microorganisms. A lot of the land that is now, in fact, all of the land that is now in agriculture, at one point was not, and there were animals that were grazing these lands. And so we're bringing some of that dynamic back into the equation. One statistic that I find fascinating that I came across recently is that about a quarter of cattle manure is bacteria by weight. And so if you think about that, sort of it's essentially an inoculation effect just by having animals on this ground. And so those are the 5 principles of soil health. And they're being promoted throughout the United States and throughout the world. But it is a far cry from what the standard of conventional agriculture is and how it's being performed in the developed world. And so Sally had mentioned that the land here, even though it was organic, it was heavily tilled. There was a lot of bare ground. There were a lot of input substitutions. So as opposed to using synthetic biocides, there were other options that are used for organics, but they're not necessarily improving the health and the vitality of the soil and the soil ecosystem. It's very rare to see animals integrated into cropping systems these days. That used to be very common. It's interesting to think about how, any one of our great grandparents who used to farmed organically. Just because the chemicals that make it not organic, or the genetically modified crops, they weren't available. Like, that distinction didn't need to be made. And animals and the bringing of animals through that system and the application of manure were very common. And so this is actually the way that farming has been conducted for many years, for many decades, many generations, for the majority of human history. But now, due to specialization, animals are completely removed from the landscape. And so you have large periods of bare ground. Even though cover crops are increasingly popular, still less than, I think it's 5% of US crop ground uses cover crops at this point. Maybe it's 10%, closer to 10% now, but it's still the minority. And I think there's a lot of room to improve there. But basically, when the cover crops are not there between the cash crops, the ground is just sitting there bare. And for the most part, sometimes people are good about leaving residue behind, but oftentimes it just gets tilled in and then it just sits there. And so there's a lot of topsoil loss as a result. And so what we're trying to do is really create, pioneer some alternative pathways using soil health principles as our guidepost to farm differently, farm regeneratively, farm in a way that is actually improving the quality of the land rather than contributing to its degradation. And so if we look around us, right now we're standing in a field of, this is a corn crop that was planted about a month ago, maybe about a month and a half ago. And we're growing corn in addition to millet and peas, triticale, wheat, and oats, as feed for hogs, chickens, and turkeys that we have on the ranch. We wanted to try to grow our own feed. And so typically, I should say what we're seeing here, maybe I'll step around so it's easier to look up the rows, is about, I'd say this is probably 20-inch spacing between the corn, which is a little bit wider than normal. But typically you would have corn that's planted in this capacity around May in most states. And then as it grows up, there's a lot of bare ground in between the corn. Plants that were weeds would be sprayed out with an herbicide, or they'd be cultivated with a mower. And there'd usually be a degree of tillage, not necessarily, before the corn is planted. And so here what we've done is we have no-tilled the corn into what was previously a small grain, a triticale crop. We harvested the triticale and left. You can see all of the thatch, the stover that is left behind. We just let it sit there on the soil as a cover, kind of that armor that I was initially talking about. And then drilled, used a no-till drill to plant the seeds right in between that. We have corn, but in between the corn, we have, you can see we put a row of cowpeas, guar, and millet. So there are a few different kinds of legumes in here. These are all nitrogen fixers. They look pretty similar at this stage. And then, so there are rows of that next to the corn. And then between that is a row of vetch and what's called hubam clover. It's a sweet clover. And what we're gonna do, all of these are fixing nitrogen, is we're gonna go through and we're gonna mow these probably in a couple of weeks when they get put on more biomass, when there's more nitrogen for them to contribute to the corn. The rows closest to the corn are varieties that are going to die off when they're mowed. And then the row in the middle will be, it'll be set back, but it'll continue to grow. And then we'll mow it again as the corn starts to canopy. And then we'll just let the corn finish. But this is a way in which we're supplying corn with a more natural source of nitrogen. We're not having to till. We are keeping the soil covered. And we're going to bring animals through here at the end to graze any of the residue and get the field ready for our next planting in the fall. So that is just an example of sort of a different approach to how one can grow something as what typically conventional as corn. I should mention this is a non-GMO organic variety, but you know, it's possible, and we'll see how it goes. It'll be pretty exciting to watch that. There are some challenges to this system that I'll run through quickly in terms of how we kind of more broadly are farming regeneratively. Some of these include the fact that if you're starting with a degraded system and you're trying to work towards something that's biologically active and provides the resiliency in terms of nutrient acquisition and reduced watering needs, right? It takes time. And so there's an upfront investment that's required to get there, and there's some question of what do you do to start that transition process and really get it firing? There aren't clear instructions, particularly we don't have a whole lot of good examples in this part of California to turn to, so we're pioneering a lot of it, and that comes with some mistakes. One thing that we've learned is it's difficult to integrate animals with irrigation. We wouldn't be able to bring the animals in here with these set of sprinklers and risers. They would want to rub up against it and break them. So we're looking at different ways that we can water crops in the summer to get around that. One of them that we have done is a center pivot irrigation system. It seems to work pretty well. The other challenges that we've had, trying to think, we have to balance food safety considerations, though there are clear guidelines for how to do that, and so we can follow those. Yeah, I think that's a good start. I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to get into that more, and I think our time here is running up to an end. So I want to thank you all for joining me in Block 1, and we're going to send you over to Kelly in the vineyard to tell you about that system. Thank you. So I was thinking it actually might be a good idea to just look together at what's happening underneath the soil. It's easy to see what's on the surface, but I've got this shovel here. So I'm going to take it's kind of a relatively deep slice here out from under the corn and see kind of what this field looks like after, let's see, this was something we started to manage in 2018, so it's been just a couple of years. And what we're seeing here is a nice sort of some good crumbly structure, which is what you'd like. I've heard people talk about how you want it to kind of be like a cake, or even like a sponge in terms of how it absorbs water. And so you can see how water would be able to percolate down in there, but there are enough small pores that would also kind of hold it in place. It feels nice, nice and soft. And then if we were to take one of these corn plants and take a look at the roots, we actually have, this is pretty cool, we have an earthworm literally just right here by the corn roots. And so what this is doing is essentially going through and breaking down some of the organic matter and the nutrients, which makes them available over time for that corn crop. And you can see the soil is just covering the roots in this way that you can barely even see the roots. This is called, some people call it like a dreadlocking effect. It's basically shows that there is this connection that's occurring where the plants are putting out this exudate, these sugars, which are sticky and cause the soil to stick to it. So we can tell that there is this good sort of biological relationship that's forming. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that sticks out to me here. I guess that the depth of the roots is pretty good. I would imagine they go down deeper, but this is about as far as I dug. But yeah, that's kind of a nice just overview of what we're looking at now. And I think with time, it would be great to see maybe even more earthworms. And I don't know, I'm pretty happy with that actually.